Hello, it's me. Feeling so much better. um, Shaved, cleaned up, tidied up, so I feel like a human being again. Quite an interesting experience. You know, there's a lot of interesting things that goes along with that Spider-Man movie. With what I've been noticing. And even what this was for me was kind of like this reset. And this happened to me once before when it was kind of like a big, shifting point in my life. But I realized that I had been, replaying a bunch of stories of like, not able to do this, not able to do this, and, little self-limiting things that were going on in my mind. And when a person goes through any sort of trauma, you develop coping mechanisms and different ways of making sure you are safe. Now, the interesting thing is that when people go through trauma, many people don't realize what the original trauma was. A lot of people don't even want to explore the trauma, because what's the point if we're all just traumatized and whatnot? So, so we have a lot of people that kind of like in this purgatory state of, not moving through into creating the life without, that trauma associated or without those coping mechanisms and behaviors. So coping mechanisms and behaviors that people, often get wound up in are addictions, habits, different things that are distractions, all sorts of coping mechanisms and behaviors. And I realized that, the greatest coping mechanism or the greatest trauma experience for us and what we're going through is realizing that it was all stemmed from guilt and that core wound of moving from the heart into the mind. So when we develop these different coping mechanisms and behaviors, the biggest thing that people do and have a hard time with is self-blame, self-judgment. And then it becomes even worse. Okay? So now if we're moving through this ascension process and this journey of becoming free, we have to not only move into a state of self-compassion and learn how to be compassionate with the self, and learning how to be compassionate with yourself when you may have an inner narrative that says you're not a good person, you're horrible, you're not worthy, you're not enough, you have this inner dialogue. And whose dialogue is that? And I realized in my own life that dialogue came from my abusers, the people who projected their pain and hurt onto me. Now, in my childhood, you don't realize that you're taking on all this stuff and you're replaying this inner record that's saying you're not good enough, you'll never amount to anything. What soul wants to be embodied in your physical body if you have a tape recorder playing somebody else's game? It's not even yours. No wonder you're traumatized. No wonder you're trying to figure out new things, coping mechanisms, strategies on how to survive, how to fit in, how to feel safe, how to be loved, how to be cherished. So when we have this dominating inner critic, and it drives me crazy because I see other psychotherapists and whatnot, and they say, oh, the inner critic is so positive. It's such a great thing to have an inner critic. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Judgment and blame? Tearing yourself down? So you're afraid to ask a question in front of a class, or you're, feeling insignificant around other human beings? That doesn't seem right to me, So these different coping mechanisms, strategies, and behaviors that we develop is, it's fascinating because these are all things that are really brilliant and beautiful. And these are different ways that you figured out how to stay alive during times of trauma. Now, people get stuck in a trauma because people like to discuss their trauma a lot. I've been there too. Okay, but But now what I'm moving through is I realized the other day, and it was great because it was like, okay, you know what? I need to be more compassionate to myself. Let's bring back my own voice. And I realized that, like, wait, that negative voice inside is not my voice. Where did that come from? I don't need it anymore. I don't need to know where it came from. And then I started moving towards self-compassion and self-forgiveness and moving into self-accountability. And when self-accountability, moving into taking responsibility for my own self, for my own actions, and realizing that there's two different ways to be in this world. There's the way of being, in that state of trauma and still playing it out, and realizing that there has not become something else beyond trauma, or actually moving into the freedom beyond trauma. Now, what does that freedom beyond trauma look like? It can be scary. It can be, oh, wait, what is freedom and sovereignty and joy? Absolute joy beyond trauma. What is that? What is that? When you have an absolute, if everything's clear, if you've cleared every different coping mechanism and behavior that was created from a state of trauma and perception of separation, who would you be? Who could you become? What can you create if you were completely free from any narratives, consciously or subconsciously, of any victim circumstance? Now, there's so many different narratives in the new age healing stuff. And it's there's a lot of things that go into like, oh, we got to process a shadow. Okay, cool. But I think people get confused about what the shadow is. And that's a big deal. Because if you don't truly know what the shadow is and you're trying to figure out what the shadow is, then it's going to cause you a whole bunch of shit. Okay? But if you know that, hey, wait, I have this limitation, and really think about, like, maybe not so much the shadow, but look into the different things, the little coping mechanisms and behaviors, the habits that are keeping you limited, and go into, wait, what if I adjust these? What if I adjust these? And what is it? What's actually more in alignment with my truth, and what would feel best to me? And so for myself, with guilt being a big, huge trauma factor, or the core wound that created the trauma, for me, my whole thing is, what's it like to experience love? What's it like to love more of who I am? What is it like to love more of what other people do? What is it like to experience love? What is it like to be in love? Like true love? Or what is it like to be in love with my life? So here's the thing, is that if we keep on thinking and replaying the same things that are continually happening, then you're not really journeying, you're not really growing and evolving. There's lots of people are talking about the galactic light codes and the data points and all this stuff, where I'm looking at it from a different way, a different perspective of your thoughts create your reality, your beliefs create your reality. What do you believe? And are your beliefs anchored from a place of the heart or of the mind? And if they're anchored from the place of the mind, then are your beliefs actually anchored from a place of truth or a place of separation? So fear-based reality. So what would it be like to be in a state where knowing that joy is actually what is your most natural state of being? We were born that way. We've always been that way. But there's all these different habits and limitations. And it's so interesting, because what's on the other side? of victim consciousness, of saying, hey, I'm not good enough, or replaying all that stuff from when we were damaged or when we experienced a trauma. How do we overcome that and rewrite those narratives and go, hey, wait, that's not my voice? And every time you do that, you anchor more light into your body. You anchor more of your truth into your body. Your DNA lightens up. You become more of the potential of who you can become. And as you overcome little limitation over limitation over limitation, because those little limitations came from a place of trauma and victimization. So in order to move past that and beyond that, we have to be courageous. Yeah, and that's scary because we don't know who that courageous person's been. But the subconscious mind can know, and what's great is that you are learning through moving forward in your life by evolving and expanding into the new you that you knew you could be, and that you, in the future, who is no longer carrying any aspect of blame, any aspect of judgment, any aspect of guilt. That is a person who is creating from the heart. And what's really, really, really cool is that when you create from the heart, you're creating solely from a place of love. When you're creating from a place of super duper boop, boop, awesome love, like there's a lot. And sometimes it can be a little intense. So there's so many different things. It's like we can do all the affirmations and you can try to be positive as much as you want. But if you haven't checked out what victim narrative that you play around in your head with, if that doesn't get fixed, it's going to be really hard to be a victim but still try to replay new affirmations that don't actually resolve the wound. Again, whose voice was that? Was it yours? If it's not your voice, why do you allow it to operate you? And if you allow that voice to operate you, what else do you allow to operate you? And this is when we go into sovereignty, okay, and the freedom. Okay? There's a lot of love out there. I just want to share these words and hope you're doing good and have a beautiful day. And I'm Danny Picard. Talk to you soon.